Well, g'day guys, and welcome back to my OzzyOcker Workbench build. This is part 9, and today we're going to be installing a shelf down here. So my plans call for a sheet of plywood to cover this section here to act as the shelf, sitting on some cleats beneath it. Now that's a really good idea. I stand by that because that sheet of plywood, because it's structurally sound, it won't be able to twist, it won't be able to allow this frame to start walking, the same as what we've done to these corner brackets up the top there. It actually locks everything in there. Now I'm not going to do that, and this is going to be my one major deviation away from my own plans. I've got some solid timber floorboards made out of spotted gum. It's a very, very heavy timber, much heavier than the Tasmanian oak that I have been using. Basically, this little stack of timber here, which is nowhere near the size of one of those top slabs that I've got over there, this is 24 kilos right here, whereas one of those top slabs is only 30 kilos, so it's only a little bit heavier. So this actually adds a significant amount of weight to the bench there, and it's a tiny amount of timber. So there's a good lesson in that. If you're really keen on making a bench top out of spotted gum, be sure you're able to lift it before you commit yourself to it. So these are good. They've already got the tongue and groove on there. They've already been machined. I'm going to remachine them anyway, but I'll keep the tongue and groove because it does what I need it to do. But what it does do is that it ends up finishing flush. Because these are floorboards, the idea with those is that you lay them down on the ground, you butt them all up nice and tight, you bring the sander over it, you sand them all nice and flush, you throw your polyurethane over the top, and happy days. It looks really great. I don't really want that because I want to be able to allow for a little bit of expansion and contraction. So I'm going to actually have to need to put the tiniest amount of gap between each of these boards, like let's say 0.5 millimeter. But if I put a 0.5 millimeter gap between each of these boards, it exposes a hard edge and a vulnerable edge, and so things can catch on that edge and start chipping that edge away. So what I'll do is, before assembling it all, I'll just run a small chamfer along that edge and along that edge to create a little bit of a V. It looks nice, it covers up the small gap that I'm going to have, and well, it's not difficult to make. And it also protects that vulnerable edge by making it a strong edge. I've also got these two longer sticks to use as cleats so that I can screw these shelf components down. Now they're a lot bigger than what I've specified in my plans. I could machine it down to what I've specified, but there's no point. All I'm going to do is square them up, and then whatever it finishes at is what it finishes at. Bigger is better, but what I've specified is perfectly fine, even though it's a lot smaller than what I'll have here. Alright, so where you position this rail is up to you, because your shelf pieces, whether it's plywood or in my case solid timber floorboards, it's going to shift it up and down a little bit. Now you've got a few choices. You can have your shelf pieces finish below these rails, and so these rails will create an effective lip so that when you put your hand plane or your chisels down there or whatever, it'll have to go up over that lip and it'll crash into the side of it. I'm not a big fan of that. It actually restricts some of your shelf space just a little bit, but it also creates a solid border so that things don't vibrate out. But this bench is so heavy, I don't see this bench vibrating anytime soon. So the other option is to go flush with this rail. You can do that, but I'm also going to put a chamfer all the way around these shelf pieces. So when I chamfer down, it'll create a little bit of a V if I put them flush. So what I actually want to do is I want to put them 2 millimeters above the rail surface, and then when I put a little chamfer on the end of it, that chamfer will finish flush with the top of that, and it'll just look nice. It'll marry in. It'll be a little bit of a pillowed shelf there. It'll look quite nice. So I take my shelf thickness, less 2 millimeters, and that'll be the top surface of my cleat. Now I'm just assuming that these tops of rails are in line. They're not actually, I know that they're not actually, but they're very close that I'm not going to worry about it. It doesn't matter if the shelf runs on an angle a little bit, like I'm not storing water on there. So if I just make a mark here, make several marks along, or you can make it all the way along if you want, I'm not going to bother. And then our cleat will sit hard up against those marks there, but they can't actually because I've got my doodads here, my glue blocks in the way, so I have to check out a bit of material in the back of it. I've got most of the panels in here because they just fit, and I've got to cut the two end pieces. Now I've got 10 boards in here at the moment, so 5 on that side and 5 on that way, and that'll give me a center line. Now I've also got center lines all over this frame, so I can just move that in line with my center line here and here. Perfect. Everything's nice and tight, so now I know the exact shape I need to cut on the two ends here. So I'm going to assume that all of this is square or very, very close to. It's close enough. So what I'll do is I'll get my piece here, I'll slide it up and I'll just bump it up to those legs. I'll flush it to those shelf pieces below it. And from there, without moving it, I can just make a tick mark on the ends, if I was able to. Very awkward. Oh yeah. And one side. So then I just need to get a ruler, measure that out. I've got 109, so 109, and I've got 108.5. These numbers don't matter that much. I'm going to give it a bunch of clearance anyway. And so then that means I need to cut a square rectangle out of here. So that's going to go. And that's going to go. So I made a mistake when I was marking this one out. This is the one that I showed on video where I've got measurements of 108.5 and 109. While on the other side I've got 108 and 107. That's fine, but that measurement is the ripping width. That's where I have to rip this all the way along because it's slightly skinnier. The measurement I actually need is the little shoulder, the little cutout here, which was 35 on this one. It's 35 and 35, so. And then whatever's left here just gets cut off, it just goes away. It's one of those things. I've come over here and I said, I need 107, and I'm like, well, where am I measuring 107 from? And I'm like, I don't know. Whoops. And I just want to square. I've got another knife line here. I'll square that across with a pencil. I'm only going to use a pencil for this because I need to cut on the inside of the line anyway to give a little bit of clearance. I don't want to be hard up against the leg. I don't want to be too far away that there's a massive gap, but I want some clearance. So it's split in pretty close with that line. We'll risk it. Nice. Alright, second try. Hopefully we get lucky. That is, whew, that's pretty good. That's not bad at all. So this one on the other end doesn't quite fit. It's a little bit too wide. So I'll show you a neat trick if I get away with it. Otherwise I'm going to ruin everything. Alright, so this front edge, that'll be a visible edge. Anything below it, you won't be able to see. So before I go and take any big risks, what I want to do is I just want to put a very light chamfer along this front edge. And so now that little chamfered edge, the very corner of it, that should be a nice straight line. So now we can hack the hell out of the back of it if we have to. Look at that. Nice. As thick as a bee's willy. Alright, I'm confident this is just going to slip straight in there. Ah, maybe not. Oh, wait a minute. Hang on, hang on. Not bad, pretty good. Pretty good, pretty good. It's pretty good. Probably a little bit too tight between here. I might give that a bit of a refinement later on, but I just want to see if I can get this whole thing connected now. So hopefully I can lift this panel up and that panel up, get that together and then drop it all back in there and it'll just spread out. Otherwise I don't know how I'm going to join this up. Ha! I got it. Wasn't looking good there for a minute, but I got him. So now that all of these boards fit in there and they fit in there nice and tight, all these joins are, they're not joinery quality, but they're pretty good for floorboards, especially that they're only loosely packed at the moment. What I actually need to do, I'm currently building this bench in the middle of summer in Melbourne, which means it's very, very dry. In winter, it gets a lot more humidity through the air and everything expands through winter, and in summer, where I am now, it shrinks. So all of these boards are in a shrunken state. So in winter, in 6 months' time, everything's going to expand. That's 1.5 meters worth of material. If I allow for 1%, that's 15 millimeters of expansion. So that's 5/8 of an inch. So quite a significant amount. So I've got 1 join, 2 join, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 joins. If I was to put a millimeter gap between each joint, that'll give me 11 millimeters of expansion. That could work. To do that, I need to take 5.5 millimeters off this end board and 5.5 millimeters off the other end board, as well as these shoulders here where I've checked it out. And that'll give me my 11 millimeters clearance, and then I just have to space these evenly when I put them all back together, it'll also make it easier to put them back together as well. So I think that'll be the best course of action. Yep, I like it. Let's do it. Oh, actually, there's not 11 joins. I've got a join next to that rail and a join next to that rail. There's 13 joins, so that gives me 13 millimeters. Yeah, that'll be better. So that means if I take 6.5 mil off this back edge and only 5.5 mil off that edge, that'll leave me a millimeter gap between this edge of the leg and the side rail. Yep, cool. If you understood any of that, congratulations, because I only understand 1/10 of it. The rest is luck. Too easy. Too easy. Alright, so making the adjustment to those two end panels to make them a little bit shorter to increase the gap between it, I've got a gap in the middle here of 11 millimeters and 11.5 millimeters. So pretty good. So that means these boards collectively will have to expand 11.5 millimeters before they start putting pressure on these two legs, stretching them apart and breaking those joints. So I think I'm well and truly safe there. So now, using some flat washers, these are just 1/4 inch washers. They're about 1 millimeter thick. They look about 1 millimeter thick. I can use these as spacers between each of these boards. I'll just put one in there. Alright, so I've managed to get all of those gapped out, except for this last gap here. So I just don't have enough space. So what I'll do is on these shoulders here and here, I'll remove another 0.5 millimeter each. Actually, I'll remove a little bit more than 0.5 millimeter. I'll take 0.7 each. That'll leave a little gap between here and here as well as giving me enough space to get another washer in there and there. So after making that last final adjustment on these shoulders on both ends, there's enough gaps, or there's enough space between the two legs to get all of these panels in there, plus these washers. All of the gaps are obviously very even because they're set by these washers. So now it's just a case of drilling a couple of holes in here, sending some screws down there. But before I do that, I'll chamfer all of these edges, because all of these edges are quite sharp, quite easy to catch. They're quite fragile when they're 90 degrees. So I've just set up my drill press to drill 2 holes to pre-drill for some brass plated Phillips head screws that I'm going to be using straight through here and into the cleat below it to mount everything. Now, because these edges on all of these boards, they're not all perfect. Some of them are skip dressed, some of them are all broken, some of them are terrible. The only common edge I have is this one here. So what I've done is I've just set up a little fence on my drill press. I can butt that up, and then I've got 2 pencil lines here and here on all of the boards that tells me whereabouts the hole goes this way. Now I can just come through and drill it. Now, you might say, well, why is my fence on a massive angle? That's so uncomfortable. Basically, my guts is right here. It creates a bit of a V. I can go in like this. Your common way of doing it, you just have your fence this way, and you have to put that there, and then I'm kind of weird. I can't really get in there. But this is just nice and comfortable and too easy. Let's do it. Alright, so this is the underside of that shelf. There's that long cleat that we put in there, and then there's all the slats there. There's nothing under this one to support it yet, so we need to put a cleat across here so that we can screw into it, making sure that when we screw into this, this is all nice and flat. It's not kicked up or pushed way down wherever it is. Well, that's as far as it goes. So we've got to make sure it stays nice and flat. Alright, so we'll make a cleat. Now we've got to cut a little angle on this side wall here because this rail here is angled in line with the legs. So we'll do that. Too easy. Nice. Very nice. Cool, 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 cool. Alright guys, so there's me shelf. That's finished. That's good as gold. Lick a polish over that and it'll come up beautiful. Not quite the plan that I had. I had planned to put a bit of plywood in there, but plywood would be perfectly fine. It would function perfectly well, and it actually increases the amount of bracing at the bottom that it has. This will give a little bit of bracing, not that much though. Like technically I could twist those out, but let's face it, these mortise and tenons, they're not going anywhere. So if you do have access to some cheap floorboards or cheap thin boards in a varying colour timber like spotted gum like I've got down there, I highly recommend it because it really does look good. Anyway, thanks very much for watching. Big thumbs up if you thought this was pretty good. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and in the next video we are going to run out of things to do. Sliding dead man. We'll do the sliding dead man. There we go. So until then, I'll catch you later.